Sometimes, second chances don't arrive in a box tied with a golden ribbon. More often, they're wrapped in the simple, yet profound, act of forgiveness. And if you stumbled upon this part of the story without knowing the beginning, I urge you to pause right here, rewind, and go back to where it all started. That's where you'll find the unlikely genesis of it all, the tale of a humble hotel maid who, exhausted and weary, accidentally drifted off to sleep in a billionaire's pristine bed. Instead of the swift dismissal one might expect, he responded with a gesture that defied expectations. But for those of you who've already witnessed that initial encounter, grab your popcorn, find a comfortable spot, and settle in. Because from here on out, the narrative takes a turn. It delves deeper, becomes funnier in unexpected ways, and tugs at the heartstrings with a force you might not anticipate. The aftermath of that impromptu press conference, where Alexander made his surprising announcement, irrevocably altered the trajectories of both their lives. And if you're just joining us, welcome. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe for more tales of love blossoming in the most unexpected and improbable of places. This story will remind you that sometimes, love can bloom where you least expect it. Alexander Reed's mansion was undeniably massive, a testament to his wealth and power. Yet, for Amelia Brooks, it felt overwhelmingly large, eerily silent, and far too opulent for someone like her to ever truly belong. The marble floors gleamed under her inexpensive shoes, reflecting the dazzling light of the chandeliers that sparkled like distant stars. The air itself seemed infused with a faint scent of vanilla, mixed with the unmistakable aroma of money. She walked slowly behind him that first evening, clutching her meager bag as if it were a lifeline. Every step was taken with trepidation, terrified that she might inadvertently break something precious simply by breathing. The other members of the household staff cast surreptitious glances her way, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and thinly veiled disapproval. They looked at her like she was a ghost that didn't belong. "Is she the maid from the news?" whispered one of the cooks, her voice barely audible but laced with intrigue. "The one who fell asleep in his bed?" another added, her eyes wide with a mixture of envy and disbelief. "She must have done something special," a third muttered, her tone laced with speculation. "He's never brought a woman home before, not even the ones he dates." Amelia heard their whispers, each word a tiny prick against her skin, but she pretended not to. A blush crept up her cheeks, burning with embarrassment. All she wanted was to disappear, to find a place to hide from their judging eyes. Maybe under a table or behind a heavy velvet curtain. Alexander, seemingly oblivious to the hushed conversations, led her into a quiet guest room located conveniently beside his study. "You can stay here for now," he said softly, his voice a calming balm against the storm of her anxiety. "Until the media frenzy calms down. I don't want you walking the streets with reporters hounding you." She lowered her gaze, avoiding his intense stare. "Thank you, sir. I promise I won't be any trouble. I'll find somewhere else once." He cut her off gently, his voice firm but kind. "You're not a problem, Amelia. You're under my protection now." His words sent an unexpected shiver down her spine, making her heart flutter in her chest. Not because of romantic feelings, at least not yet, but because no one had ever spoken such words to her before, no one had offered her such unwavering support. That night, while she sat on the edge of the plush guest bed, a bed far softer and more luxurious than the one that had inadvertently landed her in this situation, sleep eluded her. Her thoughts kept drifting back to him, replaying the events of the day. She couldn't shake the image of the way he had looked at her in front of the relentless cameras, calm and seemingly fearless. The way he had stood between her and the angry crowd, a protective barrier against their judgment, as if she were someone worth defending. Meanwhile, across the hall in his vast master suite, Alexander lay awake, staring up at the ornate ceiling. He told himself it was nothing, just a sense of guilt, or perhaps a flicker of sympathy for her unfortunate predicament. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face. The fear that had been so evident in her eyes, the genuine gratitude she had expressed, and the soft tremble in her voice when she had thanked him. By morning, He had already delivered a stern lecture to his reflection in the mirror. "She's just a maid, Alexander. Get a grip." But then he saw her at breakfast, sitting quietly at a corner table, trying to make herself as invisible as possible while the chef served her tea. Her hair was pulled back neatly in a simple bun, her uniform freshly washed and pressed, and her tired eyes lit up with a shy smile when she glanced in his direction. And just like that, the seemingly invincible billionaire, the man who thought he was immune to the messy and inconvenient world of emotions, momentarily forgot how to breathe properly. "Morning?" she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He blinked, momentarily disoriented. "Morning. Tea's good." She nodded, slightly confused by his uncharacteristic comment. "Yes, sir." "Very." He cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "Good. Excellent. Tea is very good for mornings." His longtime butler, George, who had witnessed countless power breakfasts and high-stakes negotiations, stared at him in utter shock. The great Alexander Reed, who usually barked orders like a seasoned general, was now babbling about the merits of tea like a nervous schoolboy on his first date. After she left the room, George couldn't resist. "Sir," he said carefully, his voice laced with amusement, "are you feeling all right? You seem different." Alexander frowned, defensive. "Different? What do you mean, different?" "Well," George said, his lips twitching into a smirk, "you smiled twice, and you complimented the tea. You've never done either before." Alexander glared at him, his cheeks flushing slightly. "You're imagining things." But later that day, when Amelia accidentally dropped a file folder in his office, scattering important documents across the floor, and apologized nervously, he smiled again without even realizing it. Something was undeniably happening to him. Something he didn't understand, and certainly hadn't anticipated. And for a man who was used to controlling everything in his life, who built empires and crushed competition with a single word, losing control of his own emotions was a terrifying prospect. That night, he stood by the expansive window of his study, his gaze drawn to Amelia as she helped the cook clear away dishes in the kitchen. She was laughing at something the cook had said, her voice light and carefree, and the sound drifted through the hallway like a captivating melody. He exhaled slowly, pressing a hand against his chest, trying to quell the strange fluttering sensation within. "What's wrong with me?" he muttered to himself, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Why does it feel like I can't breathe properly when she smiles?" He didn't know it yet, but he was falling, slowly, irrevocably, for the girl who had once fallen asleep in his bed. And as fate would have it, the man known to the world as the cold and calculating king of industry was about to learn that even the iciest of hearts could melt when touched by genuine kindness. By the third day, Alexander Reed was undeniably aware that something was amiss. Or at least, he strongly suspected that something was not quite right with him. The mighty billionaire, who hadn't taken a sick day in over 5 years, was suddenly distracted, uncharacteristically clumsy, and oddly soft-spoken. His personal assistants exchanged worried whispers behind his back. His board members noticed the subtle but significant shift in his demeanor, and George, his loyal butler of 15 years, simply couldn't stop smirking. "Sir, your schedule today? I canceled everything?" Alexander interrupted him, buttoning his expensive cufflinks with a nervous energy that was entirely out of character. George raised a questioning brow. "You canceled everything?" "Yes. I need to see Dr. Phillips immediately." "Your cardiologist?" George inquired, a hint of concern creeping into his voice. "Yes. Something's wrong with my heart." George blinked, utterly bewildered. "Your heart, sir?" Alexander frowned, his hand instinctively going to his chest. "It keeps fluttering. Every time I see Amelia, it feels like someone's shaking soda cans inside my chest." George bit his lip, struggling to suppress a burst of laughter. "Perhaps it's not the heart, sir. Perhaps it's—" "Don't be ridiculous," Alexander snapped, his voice regaining some of its usual sharpness. "I'm not some teenage boy with a crush. I'm a CEO, a logical man, a man of control." George smiled faintly, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Yes, sir. A man completely in control of his heart. I see. At the hospital, Dr. Phillips was casually flipping through Alexander's medical chart when the billionaire strode into his office, looking as serious as if he were about to undergo open-heart surgery. Phillips, he began, his voice grave. I think I'm dying. The doctor froze, his pen hovering over the chart. You? What? My heart keeps racing. My palms sweat for no reason. My throat tightens and I can't concentrate. It happens mostly when I'm around someone. Dr. Phillips frowned, doing his best to maintain a professional demeanor despite the absurdity of the situation. What kind of someone? Alexander hesitated, a faint blush creeping up his neck. A woman. The doctor's lips twitched, betraying his amusement. Continue. She's kind. Ordinary. But when she smiles, I feel strange. Like my entire brain stops functioning. Dr. Phillips coughed into his fist, desperately trying to hide his grin. I see. And when she's not around? Alexander sighed dramatically. I can't think about anything else. I even canceled important meetings yesterday because she left early. The doctor leaned back in his chair, his expression gentle but undeniably amused. Mr. Reed, I've treated you for migraines, insomnia, and stress-related ailments, but this one's new. Alexander folded his arms across his chest, his expression impatient. So what is it? A rare cardiac condition? Early-onset anxiety? Dr. Phillips chuckled softly. No, Alexander, it's not an illness. It's love. Alexander stared at him, dumbfounded. Love? Yes. Classic symptoms. Racing pulse, distraction, emotional attachment, mild obsession. I'm not in love, he protested, his voice laced with denial. I'm allergic to commitment. Dr. Phillips smiled knowingly. You can argue with me, but you can't argue with your heartbeat. It's louder than your ego. Alexander sat in stunned silence, the doctor's words sinking in slowly. Love? With her? He shook his head in disbelief. Impossible. Then do yourself a favor, the doctor said kindly, his tone softening. Don't run from it. Try listening to your heart for once. That evening, he returned home, pacing his study like a restless, caged lion. He replayed every interaction with Amelia in his mind, scrutinizing each word, each gesture, each fleeting glance. The way she said good morning softly, her voice like a gentle caress. The way she laughed when she spilled water, apologizing no less than 10 times. The way she talked about her sick mother as if love were the very air she breathed. She's just a maid, he muttered, trying to convince himself, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. This is ridiculous. Then he heard her laugh from the kitchen, a warm, genuine sound that somehow melted through walls of self-denial. Without even realizing it, he smiled. And at that precise moment, George walked in, carrying a tray of after-dinner liqueurs, and froze in his tracks. Sir, you're smiling again. Am I? Alexander asked absent-mindedly, his gaze lost in the distance. Yes, terrifying, isn't it? Amelia peeked into the study a few seconds later, her expression hesitant. Mr. Reed, your dinner's ready. Call me Alexander, he said without thinking, the words simply tumbling out of his mouth. Her eyes widened in surprise. I can't, sir. It's disrespectful. He tilted his head slightly, a playful glint in his eyes. Then call me Mr. Alexander. She giggled, the sound like music to his ears. That sounds funny. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. It sounds perfect. George coughed loudly, clearing his throat. I'll bring dessert. And he disappeared, grinning broadly. Later that night, as they sat at opposite ends of the long, imposing dining table, Amelia couldn't help but steal surreptitious glances at him. Something about him seemed different, softer somehow. The sharp, cold billionaire she had seen on the news had been replaced by a man who actually listened when she spoke. A man who seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and feelings. Amelia, he said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. Do you enjoy working here? She blinked, startled by the directness of his question. Yes, sir. Everyone's kind, especially you. He froze, his gaze fixed on her. Me? She nodded shyly, her cheeks flushing slightly. You defended me when you didn't have to. That means more to me than you know. He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly feeling tight. You deserve it. They both looked away, their hearts beating a little faster than before. When dinner ended, she carried the dishes back to the kitchen, her movements graceful despite her weariness. He stood by the doorway, watching her quietly, his expression unreadable. For the first time in his life, Alexander Reed, the man who had always believed that emotions were a weakness to be suppressed, realized that maybe love wasn't something to control. Maybe it was something to embrace, something to feel, something to cherish. That night he called Dr. Phillips again, his voice a mixture of exasperation and reluctant amusement. Phillips, he said, his tone resigned. Yes, Alexander? I think the condition's getting worse. The doctor chuckled, a warm, knowing sound. Then stop diagnosing it and start confessing. Alexander groaned, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. You're fired. You've said that 6 times this week, the doctor replied, unfazed. Good night, lover boy. Alexander hung up the phone, rubbing his forehead wearily. I'm not a lover boy, he muttered to himself, his voice laced with denial. I'm just severely emotionally confused. But when he went to bed, he couldn't suppress a smile because somewhere in the depths of the vast mansion, he heard her humming softly while washing dishes. And that sound, gentle, pure, and utterly enchanting, lulled him into the first truly peaceful sleep he'd had in years. The mansion felt different that week, quieter, heavier, as if even the air itself knew that something unspoken was changing, shifting the delicate balance within its walls. Alexander tried to bury himself in his work, throwing himself into numbers, spreadsheets, and endless board meetings, desperately trying to convince himself that it was just business as usual. But every time Amelia passed by with her cleaning cart, pushing it silently along the polished hallways, his chest tightened with an emotion he couldn't quite define. Every time she smiled at someone else, her face lighting up with genuine warmth, his pulse spiked with an intensity that was both exhilarating and unnerving. And every time another man's name came out of her mouth, spoken casually and without any apparent significance, something strange and unfamiliar burned inside him, a flicker of possessiveness that he found both disturbing and undeniably compelling. That morning, George found him standing motionless by the window, staring out at the manicured lawns instead of reviewing the crucial quarterly reports that lay open on his desk. Sir, the butler began cautiously, his voice soft but firm. You've been staring at the same page for nearly 30 minutes. Alexander snapped the folder shut, his jaw tightening. It's just dull. George smiled faintly, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Of course, sir. And I suppose Miss Amelia's laughter in the garden has absolutely nothing to do with your current state of distraction. Alexander turned sharply, his gaze piercing. What? She's helping the new gardener arrange flowers, sir. Alexander frowned, his brow furrowing in irritation. Why is she helping the gardener? George shrugged, his expression carefully neutral. She said he looked tired. The billionaire stood abruptly, adjusting his impeccably tailored cufflinks with an unconscious gesture. Tired? I pay him to work, not to flirt. I'll check the garden myself. George stifled a grin, knowing full well the true motivation behind his employer's sudden interest in horticultural matters. Yes, sir. I'm sure that's exactly what this is. A professional inspection of the roses. Outside, Amelia was kneeling beside a row of vibrant lilies, her face tilted upwards towards the morning sun, laughing softly as the young gardener told some harmless story about his village, his words lilting with a charming accent. Her hair glowed with a golden halo under the sunlight, and her sleeves were rolled up to her elbows, revealing the delicate curve of her arms. Alexander froze by the doorway, his gaze fixed on her. She looked happy, free, unburdened by the weight of the world that so often suffocated him. But when the gardener leaned closer to show her something on his phone, his shoulder brushing against hers, Alexander's jaw clenched involuntarily. He cleared his throat loudly, the sound echoing in the tranquil garden. Both of them turned, startled. Amelia's face brightened immediately when she saw him. "Mr. Alexander." "Good morning, sir." "Morning," he said stiffly, his tone clipped. "Enjoying your gardening?" She nodded cheerfully, her smile radiant. "Yes, sir. Flowers make everything feel lighter." The gardener grinned, oblivious to the tension in the air. "She's got a real eye for beauty, sir. She knows exactly what goes where." Alexander's tone turned cold, his eyes narrowing. "I'm aware." The gardener blinked, confused by the billionaire's sudden shift in demeanor. "Oh, yes, sir." He quickly gathered his tools, his movements hurried and awkward, and mumbled, "I'll finish this later." Amelia frowned as he scurried away, her brow furrowed with concern. "You didn't have to scare him away." Alexander straightened, his shoulders squaring defensively. "I didn't scare anyone." "You did," she said softly, her voice laced with disappointment. "He's new here, you know. Kindness goes a long way." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck wearily. "I'll keep that in mind." She tilted her head, studying him with a perceptive gaze. "Are you all right, sir? You've seemed off lately." He hesitated, his eyes locking with hers. "I'm fine." "Are you sure?" She pressed gently, smiling lightly. "Because last night you called your phone charger a contract." His eyes widened in surprise. "I did not." "You did." She giggled, her laughter like a breath of fresh air. "Then you apologized to it." For a long, fragile moment, he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that surprised even him. She covered her mouth with her hand, laughing too, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "There it is again," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You should smile more often. It suits you." Something fluttered deep inside him again, a feeling that was both exhilarating and terrifying. "Careful, Amelia," he said gently, his voice rough with emotion. "You're making it hard for me to stay professional." She blushed quickly, looking down at the ground, her cheeks flushed with color. "I should get back to work." He watched her walk away, her figure retreating down the garden path, the air around him suddenly feeling colder without her laughter in it. That night during dinner, he barely touched his food, pushing it around his plate with a lack of interest that did not go unnoticed. George noticed immediately, his brow furrowing with concern. "Not hungry, sir?" Alexander grunted, his gaze fixed on his plate. "Not really. Would you like me to ask Miss Amelia to prepare something different? Perhaps something that appeals to your appetite?" He almost said yes, the words forming on his lips, then caught himself, forcing them back down. "No, she's probably asleep. She works hard all day." George smiled knowingly, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "You'd be surprised, sir. Love doesn't let people sleep early." Alexander sighed, pushing his plate away in frustration. "You talk too much, George. And you think too much," the butler replied, his tone gentle but firm. "Perhaps try to meet in the middle." Later that evening, Alexander found himself wandering aimlessly towards the kitchen anyway, drawn by an invisible force he couldn't quite understand. To his surprise, Amelia was there, sitting at the counter with a steaming cup of tea, her head propped up on her hand, her eyes half closed with exhaustion. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper so as not to startle her. She jumped slightly, her eyes widening in surprise, then smiled when she recognized him. "You scared me, sir." "Sorry. I just couldn't stop thinking about today." He hesitated, unsure how to broach the subject. "I hope you're not angry about the garden thing." She shook her head, her lips curving into a wry smile. "I wasn't angry, just disappointed." "You sure?" he teased, his lips twitching upwards. "Because your jaw looked like it wanted to fight someone. Possibly the poor gardener." He chuckled, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. "You notice too much." She shrugged, her gaze meeting his. "Someone has to notice. You look lonely sometimes, like there's a weight on your shoulders that no one else can see." The words caught him off guard, striking a chord deep within his soul. No one had ever said that to him before, not his investors, not the relentless media, not even the people he paid to care about him. He looked at her quietly, his gaze searching. "And if I am lonely?" She met his eyes, her expression soft and unwavering. "Then maybe you should stop pushing people away when they try to care." He didn't answer, unable to articulate the complex emotions swirling within him, because at that moment, he realized that she wasn't just a fleeting source of light in his dark and isolating world. She was his world, the very center of his existence, the one thing that made him feel truly alive. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Reed, the billionaire who had always believed that love was a weakness to be avoided, finally understood what true strength really meant. It meant vulnerability. It meant connection. It meant opening yourself up to the possibility of both joy and pain, of both love and loss. Alexander tried to distract himself with numbers, board meetings, and endless files, throwing himself into his work with a renewed intensity, determined to regain control of his unruly emotions. But his mind kept circling back to one thing, one person. Amelia. He couldn't understand it. He had faced billion-dollar crises, hostile investors, and the unforgiving glare of the global press. But one humble maid, with a soft laugh and a stubborn heart, had managed to invade his thoughts like a haunting melody he couldn't stop humming. Every evening, he found some flimsy excuse to walk past the kitchen or linger near the grand staircase, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, to hear the sound of her voice. And every time she smiled politely, offering a respectful "Good evening, Mr. Reed." His chest grew warm, but his pride refused to admit it. Instead, he buried the feeling, dismissing it as mere concern for a hard-working employee, a sense of responsibility for her well-being after the media frenzy. That lie lasted precisely 3 days. On the fourth night, George entered his study, carrying a tray of freshly brewed coffee, and found him pacing restlessly, his movements agitated and uncharacteristic. "Sir," he said gently, his voice laced with concern. "You've been staring at the grandfather clock for nearly an hour. Expecting someone?" Alexander stopped mid-step, his brow furrowed defensively. "No, I need some fresh air. I've been cooped up in here all day." He walked briskly out of the mansion, grabbing his coat from the hall closet, and headed straight to the small, secluded garden at the back of the property, seeking solace in the quiet solitude. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale, ethereal glow across the cascading fountain and the neatly manicured flower beds. And there she was, Amelia, sitting on the weathered stone bench, hugging her knees to her chest, humming softly to herself. She didn't notice him at first, her gaze lost in the distance, her face bathed in moonlight. Her voice was quiet but filled with a raw, vulnerable warmth, the kind of sound that made the night feel a little less lonely, a little less empty. For a long moment, he just watched her, his heart aching with a tenderness he had never known before. She was barefoot, her toes peeking out from under the hem of her simple dress, her hair slightly messy, escaping from its usual neat bun, her uniform wrinkled from a long day of work, but she looked at peace, as if she had finally found a place where she could truly be herself. Then she saw him, her head snapping up, her eyes widening in surprise. "Oh, Mr. Reed. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to be here. I didn't want to disturb you." He raised a hand, his voice softening, his usual formality melting away. "It's fine, Amelia. This is your home, too. At least while you work here. You're not disturbing me." She smiled nervously, her fingers twisting in the fabric of her dress. "I didn't want to bother anyone. I come here when I miss my mother. It helps me feel closer to her." That tugged at him, a sharp, unexpected pang of sympathy. "You don't talk much about her." "She passed away a few weeks ago," Amelia said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "She used to tell me that kindness is the only wealth worth keeping. I try to remember that, even when life forgets to be kind back." Alexander's throat tightened, his usual composure faltering. "She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Amelia said, smiling faintly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She used to say that even broken things can shine when light hits them, right? I think that's how she saw me. And in a way, that's how she made me feel. He stared at her, his usual composed mask slipping, revealing the raw emotion that churned beneath the surface. You're not broken, Amelia. She met his eyes, her gaze unwavering. Maybe not, but sometimes I feel invisible, like I'm just a shadow, fading into the background. Those words hit him harder than he expected, resonating with a loneliness that mirrored his own. You're not invisible to me, he said quietly, his voice rougher than intended, his gaze intense. She blinked, startled by the unexpected softness in his tone, the genuine emotion that shone in his eyes. Sir. Before he could say anything more, she stood quickly, her movements hurried and awkward. I should go. It's late. I don't want to overstep. He nodded, his heart sinking with disappointment. But as she walked away, her figure disappearing into the shadows, he found himself whispering under his breath, his voice barely audible. You're the only thing I see. Later that night he couldn't sleep. His heart raced, his thoughts spun, and his chest ached with a longing that made no logical sense. He tossed and turned in his vast bed, the silence of the mansion amplifying the turmoil within his soul. When morning came and he saw Amelia serving breakfast, her face tired but her smile still bright, his heart did that stupid flutter again, and he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that he was completely, irrevocably, hopelessly in love with her. Days passed, and the situation grew steadily worse. When she tripped over a loose rug in the hallway, he rushed to her aid, his reflexes surprisingly quick. When she laughed at something the cook said, her voice like a melody, he forgot what he was doing, his mind completely blank. And when she smiled at someone else, her eyes sparkling with genuine warmth, jealousy bit at him like a fiery serpent, consuming him from the inside out. One evening, he overheard her telling another maid that she was planning to leave once she had saved enough money to support herself. I can't stay here forever, Amelia said, her voice low and tinged with resignation. People talk. They say I don't belong here. They're probably right. He froze, his blood running cold. Leave. The very idea felt like someone had punched a hole in his chest, leaving him gasping for air. That night, he paced his room, unable to focus on anything but the thought of her leaving. The mansion without her presence felt unimaginable. Too quiet, too cold, too empty. By dawn, he had made up his mind. He wasn't going to let her leave. Not now, not ever. But he didn't know that fate had its own plans, intricate and unpredictable. And before the sun set again, something would happen. A series of events that would irrevocably change both their lives forever, forging a new path they never saw coming. The day Amelia decided to leave, the sky itself seemed to sense the impending departure. Dark, ominous clouds gathered above the mansion, heavy and brooding, like the air before a thunderstorm. She had packed quietly, efficiently, her movements precise and deliberate. Just one small bag containing her few precious clothes, her mother's old, faded photograph, and the fragile courage to walk away from a life that was never meant for her. She had told herself it was time. She didn't belong in this gilded cage, this world of dazzling chandeliers and polished marble floors. She couldn't spend her life in a place that reminded her every day of the vast, unbridgeable distance between who she was and who he was. She had written a note for Alexander, pouring her heart and soul out to him. Polite, formal, almost painfully short, masking her true feelings. Thank you for everything, the note read. You've been kind, but it's time I find my own path. I wish you all the best. Amelia. Her hands trembled as she placed the note neatly on the nightstand in the guest room, her heart aching with a mixture of sadness and resignation. Downstairs, the mansion buzzed with its usual quiet routine, maids dusting antique furniture, cooks preparing an elaborate dinner, gardeners pruning roses in the meticulously manicured gardens. But Alexander wasn't in his study, poring over financial reports, or in the gym, pushing himself to the limit, or in the expansive conference room where he usually sought refuge when his thoughts became too loud and overwhelming. He was outside, pacing near the circular driveway, his gaze fixed on the horizon, the threat of rain hanging heavy above him. George had told him the news just minutes earlier, his voice soft but grave. "Sir, she's leaving." Alexander's head snapped up, his eyes widening in disbelief. "What did you say?" "She's packing, sir. Said she's grateful for your generosity, but she can't stay. She believes it's in her best interest." For a long moment he said nothing, his mind reeling, his fingers clenching at his side, his throat suddenly dry. The air seemed to have been sucked out of his lungs. She can't leave. He didn't wait for the car to be brought around. He didn't think about grabbing an umbrella, or the fact that he was still wearing his crisp white shirt, which would undoubtedly be soaked within seconds. He just ran, propelled by a desperate urgency he had never experienced before. Amelia was already halfway down the quiet, tree-lined street when the first fat drops of rain began to fall, splattering against the pavement like tears. She held her small bag tight, pulling her scarf over her head, her movements determined. Each step away from that imposing mansion felt like tearing a piece of her heart, severing a connection that had become more profound than she had ever imagined possible. She didn't hear the engine at first, lost in her thoughts, her mind swirling with a mixture of regret and relief. She didn't see the headlights cutting through the rain-soaked gloom until a familiar voice, desperate and raw, shouted her name. "Amelia!" She froze, her feet rooted to the spot. He was standing just a few feet away, drenched to the bone, rain streaming down his face like tears, his chest rising and falling rapidly as though he had sprinted miles. His normally impeccable hair was plastered to his forehead, and his usually composed expression was replaced with one of raw, vulnerable emotion. "Sir, don't call me that," Alexander said, his voice rough with emotion, his gaze pleading. "Not now. Not when you're leaving me." She blinked through the rain, her heart pounding in her chest. "You don't understand. I have to go. People are talking. They say I don't belong here. I don't care what people say," he snapped, his voice sharp, stepping closer to her, his eyes blazing with an intensity that both frightened and thrilled her. "You think I've ever cared about rumors? About what the world thinks? You think that matters to me?" She shook her head, tears mixing with the rain, streaking down her face. "You don't understand what it's like being me. I'm just a cleaner, Alexander. You're you. We don't belong in the same world. It's not right or fair or possible." He laughed bitterly, the sound more like a cry of anguish. "You think I belong in mine? You think money makes me happy? It just makes me lonelier. And the only time I felt alive, the only time I felt truly seen, the only time I felt anything at all is when you're around. And now you're walking away from me forever? Why?" Her lips parted in shock, her breath catching in her throat. "Please don't say things you'll regret. You're just caught up in the moment, feeling sorry for me, confusing gratitude for something else. It's not real. I already regret letting you walk out that door once," he said, his voice trembling with barely suppressed emotion. "I can't do it again. I won't." She turned away, unable to meet his eyes, her emotions a tangled mess of fear, hope, and disbelief. "Why are you saying this? You don't mean any of it." He took a shaky breath, rain dripping from his hair, plastering it to his forehead. "Because I can't stop thinking about you. Because when you smile, I forget everything else. Because every time I look at you, my chest feels tight, and my stomach twists into knots. And I actually went to the doctor, Amelia. I actually went to see Dr. Phillips because I thought something was seriously wrong with me. I thought I was dying or something." Despite her tears, a small, involuntary laugh escaped her lips. "You went to a doctor?" He nodded earnestly, his expression unwavering. "Yes. And do you know what he said?" He said, "Alexander, you're not sick. You're in love." He said I was showing all of the signs. Amelia stared at him, stunned into silence, her mind reeling. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe, her body trembling with a mixture of cold and adrenaline. You're what?" He stepped closer, bridging the remaining distance between them, the rain falling harder now, soaking them both to the bone. "I love you, Amelia Brooks. I love your kindness, your stubbornness, your honesty. I love the way you see good in people, even when there's none left. You're the light I didn't know I needed. He was simply a man consumed by love. And deep down, he knew that regardless of societal judgments or expectations, he would never relinquish his hold on her again. Clear's throat a year later. The Crystal Heights Hotel shimmered under the gentle embrace of the evening lights. The very same penthouse suite that had once echoed with the billionaire's simmering rage and the maid's quiet exhaustion now resonated with joyous laughter and palpable warmth. Amelia stepped through the gleaming glass doors, her once plain and unassuming uniform now replaced by an elegant, flowing blue dress that hinted at her newfound grace. Her hair cascaded around her face in soft, romantic curls, and a sense of serenity radiated from her eyes, a calmness that had been conspicuously absent before the peace of someone who had finally found her rightful place in the world. Inside, Alexander was perched by the expansive window, idly flipping through a folder, feigning absorption in his work, but failing miserably to maintain the charade. When his eyes met hers, that familiar spark ignited within them, the same magnetic pull he'd felt the night he first discovered her asleep in his bed, a poignant and unexpected intrusion into his carefully constructed world. "You're late," he said, his voice a playful murmur, though the corners of his lips betrayed him with a tender smile. She responded with a mischievous smirk, her eyes dancing with delight. "Says the man who kept me waiting 3 hours yesterday." He chuckled, a rich and resonant sound that filled the room, and rose to his feet, gracefully slipping an arm around her slender waist, drawing her close. "That was business, my dear. And this is personal," she countered, her voice soft and laced with affection. "And what's the difference with you, Amelia?" he said, leaning in, his breath warm against her ear. "Everything's personal." They stood there for a moment, entwined in each other's embrace, silently gazing at the sprawling city lights reflected in the vast expanse of the window. Far below them, life unfolded in its usual chaotic rhythm, the endless stream of traffic, the cacophony of urban noise, the relentless rush of people striving to survive, just as it always had. But up here, in this secluded haven, time seemed to slow, stretching into an infinite present, suspended between the mundane and the magical. Alexander gently took her hand in his touch sending a shiver of delight through her. "You know," he murmured, his voice tinged with a hint of nostalgia, "sometimes I still think about that night." She grinned, remembering the absurdity of their first encounter. "When you thought I was a thief." He shook his head, his expression softening with a deeper understanding. "No, Amelia, when I thought I had everything, until I realized I had nothing worth coming home to." Her smile softened, mirroring his newfound vulnerability. He raised her hand to his lips, kissing it with reverence, his voice barely a whisper. "Now I have everything that matters." Behind them, George cleared his throat with exaggerated theatricality, attempting to break the spell that had enveloped the couple. "Sir, if you two are done being poetic, the board is waiting downstairs." Alexander sighed, but he couldn't tear his gaze away from Amelia's captivating eyes. "Tell them the CEO is busy with something far more important." George rolled his eyes, a familiar gesture of exasperation, but a warm smile played on his lips. "Yes, sir." As always, once George had retreated, Amelia leaned her head on Alexander's broad shoulder, reveling in the comfort and security of his presence. "You really should go," she whispered, her voice laced with concern. He shook his head resolutely. "I spent years chasing profits, Amelia. Tonight, I'm chasing peace." Amelia laughed softly, a melodic sound that filled his heart with joy. "And have you caught it yet?" He looked at her tenderly, his eyes reflecting the depth of his love and devotion. "I think I just did." As the night deepened, the gentle patter of rain began to fall against the windows, creating a soothing and intimate atmosphere. It was the same rhythmic melody that had once brought them together during a night of unexpected vulnerability and shared solace. And in that quiet sanctuary, with the city humming a distant tune far below, the once cold and calculating billionaire realized something profound, a truth that had eluded him for so long. That love wasn't about power, wealth, or the relentless pursuit of perfection. It was about being truly seen, acknowledged, and cherished, especially when the rest of the world chose to look away. Amelia had been that beacon of light, the one who had fearlessly walked into his lonely darkness, offering warmth, compassion, and unwavering acceptance, never asking for anything in return. Now, she wasn't just a part of his world. She was his world, his anchor, his guiding star. And as they stood hand in hand, bathed in the soft glow of the city lights, smiling through the shimmering reflection of 1,000 glittering promises, Alexander whispered the words that had started it all, the words that had unlocked his heart and set him on the path to true happiness. You deserve to be seen, Amelia, and I'll never stop seeing you. Because sometimes love doesn't begin with grand gestures or elaborate displays of affection. It begins with a simple mistake, a fleeting moment, a heartbeat, and a maid who dared to sleep in a billionaire's bed. True love doesn't need a mansion or a mountain of money. It needs only two hearts brave enough to see beyond appearances, to recognize the inherent worth and beauty within each other. Sometimes, the people the world looks down on are the very ones who lift others up the highest, reminding us that true value lies not in what we possess, but in who we are. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the enduring power of kindness and compassion, don't scroll away. Hit that like button, share it with someone who still believes in the transformative magic of love, and subscribe for more stories that remind us that love, no matter where it starts, can change everything.